quitting Google and deciding to leave Google without a job lined up.
Whoa, tell us about that. In this video, we're going to chat with Stephen Congetta, the co-founder of Exponent and a Forbes 30 Under 30 alumni. Stephen's tech journey began with a dream opportunity as a product manager for Google right out of undergrad. But you'll hear why he ultimately left Google to pursue bigger things and how he bootstrapped his company Exponent, an industry-leading mock interview platform for tech professionals. And stick around until the end, where we'll talk about Stephen's playbook, a blueprint for becoming a stronger tech leader with lessons you can start applying right away. I'd love to jump in by learning a little bit more about your first job. It's always really interesting to hear about founders' first job and kind of what got them started on their career track. So what was your first job?
Yeah, so my first job ever, so this is in high school, I was a summer tutor. So I actually was tutoring people for the SAT, just kind of casually through a program at school, and then eventually sort of made a very small mini business out of it with a friend, and we would kind of advertise flyers and coach people. So that was the first time I ever kind of did something that got money back in high school.
How did you advertise? What were the flyers like?
I forget what we put up there. I think it was something worried about the SAT or something like that, contact us, and then sort of putting our credentials, which is our SAT scores, on the flyer. But a really good way to learn how to teach, because I think that's a very different skill than learning the SAT, actually.
Yeah, it makes sense. I have a pretty similar experience where I started a business in high school, and I would put flyers all over the neighborhood. And I remember at the bottom, you would write your phone number and you'd cut it so that people could kind of rip it. And it's just, it's not that long ago, but it feels like a completely different world than what we live in now.
Totally. Did you do the thing where you rip off a couple preemptively so it looks like it's more popular?
Course. You gotta anticipate demand and make it look like you're in demand.
Yeah.
What did you do after school?
So after school, after college, I worked at Google. So I was a product manager there in their associate product manager program, which was an awesome experience to be in.
How'd you land that? I'm sure a lot of undergrads would be really hungry for a Google opportunity right after college. So what was that process like?
I'm sure a lot of it's changed now, but for me, basically, I was really unsure about whether or not I wanted to be a computer science major. I switched into a junior year and then applied to internships based on that. And I just got really lucky and got this Google APM internship, which helped me then convert into a full-time offer. But I remember going to the fair and just being really confused. What is this PM thing? I've never heard of it before. Can I do it? And all that kind of stuff. But I'm really lucky that I took a chance on it and it all worked out.
What were you doing there, if you can speak to it?
I rotated twice. So I worked on Google search. So just kind of core features there. Some of the features that I worked on were delightful features. So things like you can Google solitaire and you can play solitaire in your Google search tool. We also worked on the Google Doodles, which are the homepage logo changing to different artwork depending on the holiday.
Let's jump into some of the key moments that have defined your career and kind of have led you to the point that you're at today. What are a handful that you think are really exceptional?
I would say one of them was definitely quitting Google and deciding to leave Google without a job lined up. I think that...
Whoa, tell us about that.
I really liked my time at Google, and I actually really recommend it. I think some people have different feelings about it. For me, I just could tell that I wanted something different out of life. I was not sure about a lot of things, and I was kind of early in my career. And so I was like, you know what? Let me take some time to actually intentionally explore myself. But then I also decided to take a 2-year road trip around the US. So I drove to 45 states in 2 years. And I think it was more of a soul searching kind of what do I want to do in life? And what's something that I want to do independent of what everyone wants me to do? And I think the Google job and, getting into a good school, that was all part of the kind of grand plan that I think the society, has for you. And I felt like I hadn't had enough time to really explore, what is it that I want to do? What is important to me? And so I took time off and I sort of, reduced my cost of living and tried to live really cheap so I could kind of afford it. And I think that was one of the best things I did for myself because it allowed me time. And I know it's not for everyone. It's very hard to do this, but I think the sabbatical just allows you more time to really soak in and really digest your experience as opposed to jumping to the next thing. I think the analogy maybe is someone who goes from one relationship right into another relationship. It's you're not really maybe learning or updating your information as much as if you're kind of taking the time to really process it.
What did you learn about yourself? Like, did you have a moment where you're like, this is what I want to do? What was that moment like?
I definitely had a lot of moments. I would say like I had in some ways the way I think of that for me was like it's an exploration phase. So I was a freshman in the University of Life. I remember I called it once. So it's like I'm kind of just like trying a bunch of different stuff. I picked up all these hobbies and I tried out little odd jobs here and there to see what I liked and didn't like. One of the things that I noticed that I kept coming back to though, like it was interesting. I think it's kind of like throwing dust in the air and just seeing where it falls. And it always would fall back into a couple areas for me. And I think this was a really helpful way for me to get confidence around what it is that I like to do, which is I would often always like create content of some kind, whether it's about the road trip itself, about what I'm thinking about, or anything. It would be some kind of writing or video content. And then I would always coach. I would always be interested in some kind of human to human, like development session of some kind where I would be helping someone, whether it's like I was tutoring or I was volunteering in the community, or eventually what ended up becoming Exponent was that I was coaching people for money, like interview coaching.
Was that while you were on the road?
Yeah. So I sort of, was off work for a while. So I started needing to make money. And so I was trying to find ways to make money that felt aligned to what I wanted to do in that period of my life. And I was coaching people very casually for like $20 an hour. I was like, all right, let me just like see if I can make money from this and see if I'm useful or helpful with this. And so that's what I was doing on the road.
Kind of going full circle back to your first job, right? You were tutoring back then, and here you are on the road. You're like, hey, how do I get a quick buck and kind of continue this? So that was the foundation of Exponent. How did you kind of take it from there? Your road trip ends. Like, what was the end factor like for you, and what happened next?
So toward the end of the road trip, I noticed getting really listless, to be honest. Like, I think it's really hard to live away from society in that way, where like all my friends are, in jobs getting promoted, and here I am doing what? It's always kind of an ironic ending to a soul searching journey, but I ended up going to business school. So kind of like back into the system quite strongly. But for me, it was really like I needed community and I needed space to kind of like land my thoughts. And I also really appreciate education. I think like my parents are both educators. Obviously I've tutored and I was coaching. And so being in an academic environment was something that I really was craving at the time. And so there at business school was when the idea started kind of gestating more or becoming more of a thing and growing, where I would have some symbiosis from like the class would teach me something that I'd apply to the business and try to grow the business. But it wasn't until I still was uncertain if it would be my main thing or not until a year later, when COVID started. Like, COVID happened, ed tech boomed, tech boomed. A lot of kind of tailwinds pushed us forward, basically. And the company started growing. And it was around my second year of business school where I was like, okay, I think there's more opportunity here. And I think I'd like to continue to grow this business.
So it sounds like you started a new business in business school, or was it just an extension of your coaching business that you were like, hey, let me figure this out?
Yeah, so it was mostly an extension of the coaching business. But around that time, my co-founder came into the picture where he was kind of working on side projects. And he was like, hey, like, what if you made a course out of this? And I was like, oh, that's a good idea. I didn't think of that, because I had just had this coaching platform. And we made a very small, very not proud. I'm not super proud of it. Like we charged $8 for it. It was not much money. This little course that we sold, and as a way to kind of just test demand for this product. And that little course started growing. Is also what was happening around that time too.
What was that like? And what was the content of the course? How'd you choose $8? Like that almost sounds like the founder's story, right? Like, hey, we started this thing, we launched it, we wanted to see traction, and hey, it took off. So tell us a little bit about that.
It's funny because also I think a lot of my business school classes were saying like price high, then go down usually. But we're bootstrapping this. We don't have like funding or anything. And so I was just like, okay, let me like see how many. So I remember I drank a lot of coffee for 3 days straight, and I just wrote up all the PM interview answers I could think of. I was like, this is a question. This is like the best answer I could write. I was writing it, typing it. Eventually we made videos out of it later. And then I typed it up. I downloaded it as a PDF. And then I remember the first thing I did was that I would email. I had a lot of coaching clients. So I emailed all the coaching clients saying, hey, would anyone want to get this PDF for like $5, for $8? And then shockingly enough, people wanted it, like 5 people wanted it and bought it and said it was really good. Then they slowly like took the PDF, turned it into like web pages and paywall the web pages and all that kind of stuff.
Who's the co-founder and what was his part in it? It sounds like you were building the content, you were designing the curriculum. What was their part of it?
So Jacob was building a lot of the technical site. So he was creating, so while I was testing the PDF idea, which I could do all on my own, I didn't need technical support for, but he was building the website, designing the brand, kind of coming up with the Chrome around the experience. And then what we did is I would just enter the content into it, and he would manage the website. It was a very crappy initial thing, and it ended up working, which is like a really good signal when something that you do really small is actually doing something. And then obviously we started developing more, and eventually he got more involved in creating content as well.
Oftentimes after business school, people are looking to like get a job at Google, for example, or get a job in investment banking. You're like, I actually have this business. Let's scale this thing. So how did you know it was right?
So we were selling to consumers. We also sell to universities. I remember when we got Stanford Business School as a university client that was actually paying us money for the tool to be used by the students. We were both like, oh, whoa, like this is legit. This is actually a thing that Stanford is using. And then quickly after that, we got Yale and MIT to join as our first three university clients. And I think around that time, we were pretty stoked because we're like, okay, this is going to last for a while now because universities will renew this and they're finding value out of it. Yeah, that was one of the big moments.
Getting back to kind of the initial question, I know that we've gone down the rabbit hole of like the founding of Exponent and what that looked like. What are some other key moments that you want to speak to in your journey here?
Honestly, like, I don't know how to put this, like COVID, working really hard in COVID, like COVID itself was a really good time for growing a tech business, just because of what was happening in the market. I would say one milestone with that, it was when we made our first full-time hire. And that was like, okay, we're ready to actually commit to this and like kind of grow this in a way that's more intentional. Up until then, we'd only been hiring interns. And I think, it was a level of also commitment to the company that I hadn't really had before. Because when you have like another person who's they're like, you're salarying them, you need to make this much money. Otherwise, it's not a good fit. I think around that time was just this period of, I would call it like growth and investment and kind of energy put into the company. And honestly, for me, a lot of time to the point where it was teetering on burnout for me, to be totally honest.
Yeah.
Like it was a lot of investment. And I think with COVID, you don't really have anything else going on. So that was a challenging period too, for sure.
Yeah, the grind was real during COVID, if I remember. There was just nothing else to do that you're just like, oh yeah, I could just keep working, keep going.
Yeah.
What was the amount of time between the first hire and you finishing business school?
So I finished business school in 2020, and then we made the hire by the end of that year. So it was a little after I graduated, that we invested. And I remember over the summer, we had a bunch of interns that were kind of proving out that we had demand for that. I remember at that point of that hire, I was just so stressed out because I was doing so much that it was just, we needed help. Like, I was still answering all the customer support questions then. I think there's one thing of like learning how to build a product and launch a business, but learning how to scale a business and hire people under you and delegate was a skill that I had not really developed other than theoretical understanding in business school.
It helps a lot when you're doing it all, right? And you're like, oh yeah, this is how it all works. So if I hire this person, they can do this. And I do think that there's a lot to be said about answering customer support emails, for example. To getting off the ground, doing that type of work makes you a lot closer to your customers, a lot closer to the business. Have you guys raised funding?
No, we have not raised funding, and we don't plan to. And I think that's been a very principled choice on our part. And also it kind of generates principles from it too, because if you don't raise, then you have to be frugal. And so then that kind of becomes a principle by the nature of that choice. There was a time I was considering it when business school was, that community was more strong and people were constantly telling me I should do that, but it never really made sense to me. And I think I've really enjoyed being more intimate with the P&L of a business. Like the profit comes in and the lot, like, you have to make sure that you make enough money to, feed the team and to all this kind of stuff. And I think that is a very valuable skill that I sometimes don't see in my peers who have raised money, where it's just, spending lots of money. I do think there's downsides too. Maybe in terms of milestones, sometimes the way I talk about it is like hiring our first salesperson was like a really big deal because it was a really big commitment for us like a couple of years ago. But for another type of company that was raising money, it would have been a no-brainer that they would have like a team of salespeople since day one. So we had to kind of like earn that over time.
Awesome. Stephen, why don't we switch gears to our section called the Blueprint? And so in this section, I'd love to hear what are your 3 most important learnings over your career?
I would say one, it's a principle from Amazon, is bias to action. So whenever possible, I try to make choices that take action as opposed to thinking about something too much. I'm an overthinker, to be honest. And so I get trapped into that. So just always make a choice or like do something that kind of leads to a new decision and choice. The second one I would say is really just being oriented toward people in your life. So I think the best career choices that I've made in my life have been ones where I choose the people that I work with, not the industry, not even the job function. It's just that I'm working with people who really respect me and I respect them. Whether it's work or, other parts of your life, I think always orienting toward like, who are these people and are these the right people? And then my third one is just to be present. Like life goes by so quickly. Like I, still remember all these things from when I was younger and I wish that I could go back and live them again, but you can't. And so even the painful parts, I feel like become really fun to look at after periods where I got really burned out or periods where I got really, frustrated with how the company was doing. I look back on that now as part of like a hero's journey or as part of a kind of just part of my whole journey with the company, and I appreciate them. And so I try to remember this all the time myself, but if I can just be present and appreciate every moment, even if it's a tough one.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this episode, please like and subscribe to this video so you can make sure the next video hits your feed. And if you missed our last episode, you can always go back and watch it right here. In that episode, I chat with Manlio Lacan about what it takes to be a successful product leader. He went from junior engineer to product manager to chief product officer at Zwift. Really interesting story, was a lot of fun. Click the link to learn a little bit more about Manlio.